Hello everyone. If we haven't met, my name is Ben, and I'm just really happy and thankful that I was asked to share a devotional with all of you today. The passage that we're going to be looking at and meditating on today is in Mark chapter 10. We're going to be starting in verse 17. So this is the story of the so-called rich young ruler, and it's a very widely known and widely taught story of Jesus. And today what I'd like to do is, hopefully by looking at what Jesus called this young man to do, we can see what he may be calling us to do right now. So I'll read the passage starting in verse 17. It says, "And as he was setting out on his journey, a man ran up and knelt before Jesus and asked him, 'Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?' And Jesus said to him, 'Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone. And you know the commandments. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, and honor your father and mother.' And he said to him, 'Teacher, all of these things I have kept from my youth.' And Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said to him, 'You lack one thing. Go, sell all that you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me.' Disheartened by this saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions." I think this story can be kind of difficult to read just the first time because it seems that Jesus is giving a very harsh commandment or a very strict commandment to this young man. And I think for some of us, especially those of us who care a lot about wealth or trying to have financial security, it can be difficult to read on the outset. I think the first thing we need to understand to see what Jesus is saying here is who this young man is and what he's like. And in the ancient Roman Empire, which is the time that Jesus lived in and this young man lived in, wealth and status were inextricably linked. And in all the gospel accounts, it tells us that this was a rich young man. So how could a young man be so wealthy in the Roman Empire? Well, it's because he comes from a wealthy family. And that's it. So just by telling us that this is a rich young man, we know that he had status. He came from a good family. When he walked around his local community in Judea, people said, "Oh, that's the landowner's son. That's the merchant's son, and we better help him out and do what he says." And so we know that this young man had wealth and he had status. And it also seems that he was a good young man with a good heart. After Jesus goes through, a short list of commandments from the Old Testament, the young man says, "Well, I have kept all these from my youth." Meaning he had good Jewish parents. They taught him the law, and ever since he was young, he tried his very best to follow what the law said. And so if we know that this man was very wealthy, came from a very good family and had high status, and was doing everything he could to follow the law, then why exactly does he come to Jesus in the first place? Why does he say to him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus, in his response, who, as we read earlier in the Gospels, Jesus knows the hearts of people. He sees this in this young man. He says, "Well, you know the commandments. Why do you ask me what it is that you should do to have eternal life? Follow the law and the prophets." So we can tell that there's something that this young man is feeling because he has this wealth, he has this status, and he's been trying to follow the law his whole life. But he hears about this Jesus guy. And he feels this emptiness. And he's been feeling this emptiness probably since he was young. And he says, "Maybe this teacher can tell me what it is I need to do. Because I have all these things, I have this status, and I've been following the law, but what am I still missing?" And I think the beginning of verse 21 is critical to understanding how Jesus responds to him and what he says. It says, "And Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said to him, 'You lack one thing.'" So this man who had as much money as you could want in the ancient Roman Empire, who had high status and recognition, and who had been trying to keep the law his whole life, Jesus could see that there was something keeping him from the fullness of God and from the promise of eternal life. And as we see in his commands, it was the wealth, and it was the status, and it was the self-righteousness. He says, "You lack one thing. Go, sell all that you have and give it to the poor, so that you will have treasure in heaven. And then come follow me." And when Jesus says, "Come follow me," that doesn't mean let's take a walking trip together and learn some great lessons from the Bible. It means leave behind your wealthy parents. Leave behind the community that recognizes you and says, "Oh, I'll do what this guy wants." And by following Jesus, you have to give up your preconceived notions of what it means to be righteous, because everything he's taught so far has thrown that all to the side. And then the young man is disheartened, and he goes away sorrowful because he had great wealth, great status, and great self-righteousness. And so, looking at what Jesus tells him to do, how does that inform what we should do? And I think the biggest thing is that it may not be wealth for us that is our source of identity, our source of fullness, like it was for this young man. But if Jesus were to look into our eyes with his perfect, selfless love and said, "You lack one thing. There is one thing that's keeping you from the fullness of God and the promise of eternal life, because you keep running to this to feel full instead of running to me. You keep running to your job. You keep running to your family. You keep running to addictions. You keep running to a sense that you need to do enough to feel full." Jesus says, no, that's not what you're lacking. What you're lacking is me. And so the question I want to leave all of us with, because I know I need to ask this of myself, is what would Jesus tell you that you need to leave behind so that you can have the treasure and the joy of knowing and following him? Thank you all so much for listening, and I pray that you have a blessed week.